needs and I will.
Debate is an important element of progress. Hi, I'm Selwyn Manning and you are watching A View from Afar. And today we are looking at the rise of a new generation of nuclear weapons. While the old Big Bang style of mad or mutual assured destruction nuclear bombs may be very 20th century, today's new tech, precision styled tactical nukes provide, according to the United States, a flexible response strategy. Basically, in their view, a survivable option. But let's consider the Russian Federation's view that should the US deploy a low-yield nuclear weapon, then Russia would retaliate with a massive response. Does this mean a worst-case scenario is probable, where a small-scale nuclear attack is believed by the United States to be a survivable option, but in reality it is a miscalculation that could quickly escalate out of control and into full-blown nuclear war? And does mad nuclear deterrence argument, does this render the mad nuclear deterrence argument dead? And was it really a crazy idea in the first place from the New Zealand point of view? To discuss this, we are joined by political scientist and former US Pentagon analyst, Paul Buchanan. But first, it's a bit of an invitation here. If you see something or hear something that you would like to comment on, you can do so in the comments area of Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. And if you do comment while we're alive, that is, we'll be able to include your interaction in the program. Okay, for now, let's cross to Paul Buchanan for a deep dive into the big nuclear issues. Good afternoon, Paul.
Hi, Selwyn. Nice to be here.
Some big stuff on the table today, isn't there, to discuss? You can't get much bigger than nuclear war and nuclear weaponry and all of the strategies and tactics that surround that. So what do you make in the first instance, Paul, of revelations perhaps coming from the Donald Trump area that he says he has invented a new high-tech nuclear system?
Well, beyond the fact that it was a breach of secrecy that now alerts U.S. opponents to the fact that there is a new nuclear technology in the U.S. arsenal, it reminds me of this. About 2 weeks ago, the Russians declassified video of what was known as the Tsarina bomb from 1959. And that Tsarina bomb was the biggest nuclear explosion. Yeah, we're watching it at this moment.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
I'll play the voiceover. And so that bomb, which apparently had, something like 1,000 times the strength of the Hiroshima bomb, if not more, I don't remember the exact figure, was dropped from a conventional aircraft. And it did what is known as an airburst. Airbursts usually occur between 1,000 and 3,000 feet. That's because they can maximize the damage on the ground. If you get any lower, the damage is more concentrated. And the important thing there is the Tsarina bomb, as we see it go, is a dumb bomb. The bombardier calculates airspeed, wind speed, direction, weight of the bomb itself, and launches it. But once it leaves the plane, who knows where it could go. Trump's description of this new nuclear weapon shows you the evolution of nuclear technology since 1959. Target accuracies, that is the targeting systems, particularly on ballistic missiles, has become so accurate that what is known as the circular error probable, that is the diameter of the circle around the target in which the warhead is going to hit, has been reduced to a few meters. After a 10,000 kilometer flight, a US ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, would land within 3 or 4 meters of the target. And what that means is you don't need these huge yield weapons anymore because you can target a lot more accuracy and use lower yields. for the same effect without all the collateral damage.
So it's something like this that I'm just bringing on screen now, Paul. This is the new smaller nuke warhead deployed for the first time. This is Defence News, February 4th this year. It was published. Is this what we think Trump is talking about? We'll just show.
Yeah, that's the latest generation of what is known as an SLBM, a submarine-launched ballistic missile. Usually of an intermediate range, so anywhere between 500 and 3,000 kilometers, but yes, with a low-yield warhead. But this gets to the important point. You mentioned mutual assured destruction.
Yeah.
That was the operative strategy in the era of dumb bombs. And the idea there was that you held cities, you targeted cities.
Yeah.
And the insanity of targeting masses of humanity served as a deterrent on each side. But you targeted them because cities are big, and you don't have the accuracy to go looking for what are known as hard targets, bunkers, command and control and communication centers, and the like. Now they have that ability to do so. And so a doctrine has been developed called flexible response.
Flexible response, wasn't that around, John Kennedy brought that in 1961 in its original sense as a change from Dwight Eisenhower's Big Bang kind of, let's just get the biggest ones out there, blow your opponent off the face of the earth. Kennedy was flexible response, wasn't he, right at the beginning of his presidency?
Well, yeah, although it didn't really develop until the late 70s. But again, it was technology driven. But the strategic implication is this. With the advent of more accurate targeting technologies, with the advent of ballistic missiles that could travel intercontinentally, and with the advent of what are now known as tactical nuclear weapons and intermediate range nuclear weapons, it made no sense to target cities and leave hardened military installations intact. Made absolutely no sense. So now, and this is from the late 60s, early 70s, the rationale of nuclear targeting goes like this. You target hardened military installations with nukes, and you hold the cities hostage. You need the cities to negotiate with, but you kill off their ability to retaliate. And all of this assumes a second strike capability. See, no one's moved to, well, we will use nuclear weapons preemptively. The United States doesn't confirm or deny that it has a first use strategy, but the overall logic is you launch something towards us that has a nuclear tip to it, then we will second strike you into oblivion, but leave cities.
Let's just back up on that point a little bit. Under George W. Bush, didn't the United States put out a document that where not talking nuclear here, but we're talking military strike, where it believed there were a number of different areas where it was justified to have preemptive defense, meaning, and it included economics, if I remember right. So, when we're looking at a nuclear power, from down here in the South Pacific, there are warning bells all over that type of document. And as I understand it, that hasn't been chucked in the rubbish bin or the trash can. That still exists today.
No, very good point. And it also shows you the erosion of nuclear arms control agreements over time. And we'll get to that in a second. But here's the problem. Bush confused preventative war with preemptive war. A preventative war is where you're about to be attacked. And so rather than wait to be attacked, you go first. And so you strike at an opponent who is clearly within, let's say, days of attacking you first. So you try to prevent the damage by going first. Preemptive wars are you start a war without due cause or provocation. You see a strategic advantage in starting a fight, and you go for it. And let's just say that under international law, the laws of war, preventative wars are justified, preemptive wars are not. And yet Bush managed to conflate the two, and that, as you say, has not been removed from the strategic lexicon of the United States. And I would imagine that because the United States has adopted such a posture, its major rivals have not. The other thing to keep in mind is that because of these very accurate targeting technologies, let's say on the tip of a cruise missile, nuclear weapons in their large size are no longer that quantum step above conventional munitions
Yeah.
that can be used to pretty much the same effect. I mean, I was thinking of the mother of all bombs,
Yeah.
Moab.
Yeah, Moab. Yeah,
Tora Bora.
Tora Bora, and also I think threatened to be used, or was it used in the Iraq War, and when the United States was trying to actually, well, it's in the invasion period, put it that way.
Yeah, I think a Moab was used in Iraq. There's a key point to keep in mind here because it applies to air-launched missiles,
Yeah.
dumb bombs, and ballistic missiles. And it's that right now, when particularly a strategic intercontinental missile is launched, you have the launcher, a missile, but on top of it are multiple warheads, and they can be either MIRVed or MARVed. MIRV means multiple independent reentry vehicles.
Right.
The idea is when it comes back into the Earth's atmosphere, the nose cone opens and 10 to 12 missiles go in different directions.
So this is like a really scary cluster bomb on a bigger scale.
Yeah, and this has been around since the 70s. Now, MARVs are maneuverable reentry vehicles. And so not only are there multiple vehicles in the nose cone, but they can be maneuvered by operators on the ground or in the air or at sea. And cruise missiles operate that way. There's a camera in the front of the cruise missile, and an operator guides it straight into the window of a bunker. I mean, he sees it all the way to the strike. Strategic weapons now have that capability. So with all of these technologies, the interesting thing is that there are conventional munitions available that can have the same effect as what nuclear weapons used to have back in the day. And again, everything now is focused on battlefield applications, not on killing cities. I mean, this is one of the things that's interesting. Here in New Zealand, a lot of people think that the big powers still operate under the MAD premise. And that was jettisoned, almost 50 years ago, and has been replaced by this flexible response. Now, the key here is, does that improve or does it decrease the chances of war or deterrence, whichever way you look at it?
Exactly. So when you're talking about a battle that is going wrong, in conventional warfare, all the sophistications of precision bombing, drone strikes, etc., and the United States is still under threat, albeit perhaps, it's people overseas deployed around the world. You get to a situation in a particular theatre where it starts to creep. There's mission creep. I'm talking obviously scenario here. Do you see that there is a likelihood, a strong likelihood, when you consider the doomsday clock, that tactical nukes could be used, high-tech 2020 decade weaponry, of which you're detailing here, could be used in the first instance? And then second, let's have a look at whether or not, when you consider the Russians' response, that if deployed, that they would basically take that as a MAD type of attack, and they would hit back with the biggest that they had.
Well, it goes to one of the fundamentals of combat, which is you want symmetry with your opponent. And by that, what I mean is if using conventional weapons, an actor is about to be overwhelmed, and they have access to tactical nukes, let's say fired from an artillery shell, low yield when compared, for example, with Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but nevertheless a nuke. If they're about to be overwhelmed conventionally, under the military doctrines of several of the nuclear powers, the field commander, if he has those weapons at his disposal, can use them. Now, normally such a use will go straight to the top of the political system, be it Vladimir Putin, be it Donald Trump, it would definitely require authorization. But depending on the circumstances, if they were dire enough, you could see the introduction of tactical nukes, including those so-called neutron bombs, which leave inanimate objects standing and kill off any living being in the circular or probable radius of that warhead. Now, I think what's important is the symmetry. If opponents have the same capabilities in the tactical battlefield, it probably will not escalate beyond their mutual capabilities.
But when you consider the consequences and the dire consequences, that's a big summation to make.
It is. And again, the chances for miscalculation
is huge.
Are huge.
And you're talking, a planet that's already under stress in many different areas. Miscalculations can't even come into it. It's got to be an assured element. I guess what we're doing here is we're getting down to the tin tacks of whether or not the globe can survive better under a deterrence argument, or whether or not it's better to move down the non-proliferation track, which Obama and others seem to be trying to advance, albeit not in practice perhaps, but in rhetorical positions. And that the planet would be better off if there was some sort of move toward that, the denuclearization of the world. So we're getting down to those fundamental bipolar, if you like, positions where it's very difficult to see common ground between the two camps. Is that a fair assumption here? And I'm talking about the severity, the gravity, and really, testing out that area, whether or not there is room to miscalculate if the pro-nuke line is taken.
Well, that's the crux of the matter. We have to redefine our notions of deterrence in pursuit of de-escalation and, more importantly, disarmament. Let me point out that this year is the 50th anniversary of the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
And it's got its problems.
It's got serious problems, not the least of which is the 7 recognized nuclear states are not signatories to the NPT. And the implicit bargain was that nuclear states would reduce their arsenals in exchange for non-nuclear states not trying to acquire nuclear weapons. And that's eroded considerably. We have non-nuclear states that are attempting to acquire nuclear weapons, although most of the nuclear states have somewhat reduced their arsenals. That's, again, more technology-driven than principle-driven. And interestingly, the major strategic arms limitation agreement, one that exists between the United States and Russia, known as the START agreement, is due to expire on February 5th, 2021.
So where does that leave people?
Well, the Russians appear, maybe because they're at a strategic disadvantage, they appear interested in renewing it, but Donald Trump is not, which may explain why he blurted out that revelation to Bob Woodward about some new type of nuke that he has.
And a system, the emphasis on the word system.
Yeah, and I would imagine, there's another thing I failed to mention earlier, which is the major trend in weaponry. Something we also see in the civilian world is towards miniaturization, nanotechnologies. We've seen it in space, and I have a feeling that what Trump is referring to is perhaps not nano nukes, but miniaturized nuclear weapons that don't need very large delivery systems, are low yield but super accurate and pack a powerful punch.
Okay.
When applied to a specific target. So
what I'd put to you on that, so we kind of get all the detail, we get the purpose, we get the strategic advantage that various superpowers may believe that they have. If we, once again, I think in testing this out, is some of the realities in a geopolitical sense. So you've got the United States believing that it has a technical advantage here, a strategic advantage, I probably should say. The Russians, well, they haven't been sitting on their hands either, particularly during the last 4 years. So one would imagine that they're not going to allow themselves to trail too far behind. There may be different ideas behind it, different abilities, but then there's the Chinese. If you're looking at some sort of agreement that comes out of those three significant powers, the Chinese are saying we don't want a bar of holding back or denuclearizing our weaponry and our arsenal because we've got so much catch up to do. The United States and Russia are so far ahead. So even with a change in the White House, should that come in November, well, in January once the new elected president may be sworn in, how do you see that playing out if we consider that the short term in the new 2021 year?
Well, the Trump administration's posture may or may not be a bargaining chip. They've already withdrawn from the intermediate range ballistic missile treaty with the Russians. That's a treaty that covers nuclear weapons that are fired from missiles that have a range of 500 to 2,500 miles. So figure 1,000 kilometers to 3,500 kilometers. The Americans argued the Russians were always cheating by using cruise missiles and not counting them against, the overalls, whatever the case may be. That treaty is dead. And the Trump administration says it will renew talks about that treaty if China joins. They say, we no longer can have a bilateral when the Chinese are stockpiling exactly these sort of weapon systems because the Chinese have a tactical advantage in East Asia, the South China Sea, in these sort of weapons. They simply have more of them, including the infamous carrier killers.
So it's intensifying, their patch, if you like, is significant.
And you said it, the Chinese have no interest in tying their hands together just because the United States and Russia have decided to do so. They see an opportunity here to get up and play on a level playing field, if not strategically, then certainly within the theater that they're most concerned about, which is, their border regions. So
I just want to look at this idea of, there's two things running here from what I can pick up, beyond what we've just underlined before. And that is that it's not an abandonment of MAD, but that's parked, isn't it? So the nuclear powers have their big bombs, yeah. So let's just keep that on the table, but put it over there. The tactical nukes have advanced technologically to the point where they're smaller. So it brings in the idea of flexible response into a more realistic kind of strategy. And underneath that, there's all sorts of tactics that can be used to get a particular side's advantage. Deterrence in a flexible response area seems to me to be only relevant when you have a sane, steady pair of hands in the White House, in the Kremlin, and in Beijing. If you've got a nutcase in the White House, deterrence, there's nothing to actually deter. That the unpredictability brings a danger to the world of which these theories of deterrence do not work anymore. There's also the danger that flexible response can be, okay, we're outpacing the Russians. The US may think we're outpacing the Russians. We're at a situation where we will now deploy in a small amount our very small nuclear warheads, where it's going to hurt, but it's not going to destroy. I'll just bring up here on online here. This is Defence News again, and this is coming out of the Department of Defence files here, where they're kind of summarising here that proponents of the system believe the US needs another low-yield nuclear option in order to credibly counter Russia, which has invested heavily in a variety of nuclear systems in the past decade. And it goes on to kind of say that it believes that if the United States deployed a smaller nuclear weapon, then the Russians would probably do the same. But the Russians are coming back at the front end of this, and we mentioned at the beginning of the program, and they're saying no. Any particular warhead, irrespective of how large and its size, the Kremlin will consider that as if it was a huge, the United States equivalent of the Tsar bomb, and it would retaliate with the biggest that it's got. So once again, we're getting to a point where there are different polarized views on what could play out. So I know that's a long kind of wind in to this particular crux of the issue, but it's one I think that is relevant in this day and age, where the dangers are an erratic leader in the White House, an authoritarian leader in the Kremlin, and China, which is under pressure and under significant pressures around its own borders, where it is also strongly becoming more authoritarian by the week. And so where do you feel, without putting it to you in David Longy terms about, I can smell the uranium on your breath as I lean towards you, quote, where do you think the sense of all of this doctrine is as we enter into the 2020 decade where new technology nukes are a reality?
Well, they're definitely a reality. And I would simply say about the Russians, if they truly believed that having a flexible response capability through the full spectrum of force would nevertheless lead to strategic nuclear exchanges and mutual assured destruction, then they wouldn't have any flexible response. They would just have massive nukes, and at the first sign of a nuclear exchange at a tactical level, they would go strategic. And again, they would do the mad scenario. But what's happened here is that there are two logics of deterrence at play, if you will. For the established nuclear states, mad is dead. There is no more mad. It's all about flexible response through the spectrum of force, always seeking to achieve symmetry on a specific battlefield or in a specific context. However, for nuclear states like India and Pakistan, MAD does apply. Their technological systems are more primitive. They have much less warheads. And so for them, it's a lot of all or nothing. So those weapons are the old-fashioned deterrent weapons. Yep. They're not supposed to be used.
Yeah.
And then for states that want to be nuclear powers, like North Korea, Iran, Israel already is an undeclared nuclear power. Those weapons are pure deterrence weapons. I mean, it's possible that North Korea would launch a missile in anger, and then it'd be turned into glass. But the Iranians are not that crazy. One Iranian nuke deters all of the Sunni Arab world. It deters the United States. All they need is one.
Okay, so you've well defined those three different areas of progress, if you want to put it in that way, technological progress. Let's park that, and we get that. You've gone back to the deterrence that was an accepted position through the 1980s, because of the mutual destruction kind of elements of it, should nuclear war be entered into. Let's go back again to the three significant powers, because that's where the deterrence element with the new technologies needs to be tested. So the United States, Russia, and China. So once again, I put it to you, where are we relating to deterrence when you consider those three actors, if you put it that way?
The deterrence is on the battlefield. It's not in the strategic realm. And let's also remember that
the danger is both strategic and on the battlefield and for the globe. So it's a relevant question. Yeah.
Right. Once the genie is pulled out of the bottle on the battlefield, then it's an open question as to where escalation will stop. That then gets into, is it an existential fight? What resources are being fought over? Those sort of things. But let me give you a positive ray of hope. In the 1960s, the oceans were awash with nuclear-tipped mines. particularly in choke points. So the Strait of Gibraltar, the Moluccan Straits, the Straits of Hormuz.
Yeah, Hamois, yeah. Yeah.
There were nuclear tipped mines. They were mostly American and Russian, Soviet those days. Those have been withdrawn. And they haven't been withdrawn by treaty. They've been withdrawn because the powers that be have decided that deploying them is too dangerous from an escalatory standpoint.
So,
Even
so
though,
should the world's citizens, if we put it that way, be quite comfortable with that? That they did that, so therefore we can rest assured and go about our lives without any concern, thinking, well, that shows that they've got common ground, that they've got goodwill. I would put it to you that it doesn't.
well, think about it this way. One of the interesting aspects of New Zealand's declaration of non-nuclear status included the refusal of a port visit by a U.S. destroyer that has my name.
Buchanan. It
The
was a
USS
bit of, unlike you, Paul, it was a bit of a rust bucket sitting out in the Pacific. So,
It still packed a punch, I'll tell you. And the reason it packed a punch is that one of its missions was to deploy nuclear tipped mines. And so the Longi government wanted the Americans to tell them that there was no nukes of any sort,
yeah,
not the propulsion system, and it certainly didn't have nuclear bullets or those sort of things, but it was all about the mines, and the United States would not agree.
it didn't confirm nor
There was
deny.
nothing on board,
Yeah,
and that's evolved into submarines and the like. So, I mean, there was actually an instance in New Zealand history that provoked a rift with the United States over something that now no longer exists in terms of operational capability because the Americans realized.
yeah, from that point of view. But once again, just to make it very clear, the law still exists today, irrespective of what government has been in power in New Zealand, where it is illegal to have nuclear propulsion or nuclear weapons come into the territorial waters. And it took until Condoleezza Rice actually indicated that New Zealand was now a friend and an ally for that cold shoulder, if you like, between the two countries to actually melt. So,
Well, essentially what's happened is the United States, has said publicly that none of its surface fleet, with the exception of the carriers, has nuclear propulsion or are carrying nuclear weapons. And so they've given assurances indirectly to New Zealand that anything other than a carrier or a sub is de facto non-nuclear. But I'd like to.
But it hasn't tested that out. Neither side has got the commitment. If the United States sent a ship over to New Zealand and docked at our wharves here, that would place its neither confirmed nor deny positions as obsolete and irrelevant.
No, but it did. It did for the 50th or the 100th anniversary of the New Zealand Navy. They sent a destroyer.
Yeah.
And I think it was the Fitzgerald, USS Fitzgerald, I believe. But anyway, they sent so they basically admitted.
But there was that was a situation where the Prime Minister of New Zealand understood that there was no nuclear weapons and no nuclear propulsion on the destroyer. Otherwise, it was illegal for it to enter our waters. So the United States didn't publicly say that it confirmed or denied, but it actually was believed by the New Zealand government that it had been indicated that it didn't breach our territorial laws.
Right. I don't know what was said in private between diplomats, but what I can tell you is the United States, as part of the negotiation to allow the port visit of this destroyer, reiterated its public stance on propulsion and weapons on its surface fleet, gave a big public statement. And the Prime Minister accepted that statement at face value.
Yeah.
Now, what assurances were given quietly? I'm sure there were some. But the fact is, I mean, if you wanted to get into who won, I personally would not. But the United States clearly recognized that New Zealand was within its rights to demand to know whether there were anything nuclear on board.
Yeah.
And by its public admission, it tacitly agreed that they were not. Hey, Selwyn, if I can, let me just say something about rationality.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing. We assume the other side, in this case, let's say the Russians and the French and the Germans, the English,
Hmm.
look at the United States. And over the years, they have thought, well, they're very rational. And so they're not going to do anything crazy with nuclear weapons. But with Donald Trump at the helm,
Yeah. Which gets to that point I was making.
yeah, no, that's why I bring it up.
Yeah.
But here,
Yeah.
let me show you the perverse logic here.
Hmm.
And it's a weird story, but I think it'll illustrate the point. There is a game of chicken that's played in South America where I grew up, where you throw knives at your opponent's bare feet, and the first person to flinch loses.
It's not a game I want to play, Paul. We won't get into sport on if that was the deal.
No, but here's the thing: is
Yeah.
that it's a very effective game in Latin societies, and boys like to play it. But what is the best strategy to win a game of knife chicken? Well, one of the strategies is you grab the knife, you stab yourself in the thigh with it, go, and then you prepare to throw.
Yeah.
The other guy's going to jump a mile.
Thinks you're a madman.
And that's the
Yeah.
thing. The crazier you act, the more
Look,
you deter.
yeah, I get what you're getting at there with respect to Donald Trump, but look, it doesn't breed confidence in myself when you've got a president out there that believes that he has weapons that are survivable, that it gives a significant strategic advantage because it allows flexible response, that he, in his own mind, gives every appearance that he believes he can get into this lower scaled, smaller warhead style nuclear war should he wish to. And this is a president that only in the last week has made reference to these hurricanes that are coming across the eastern coast of the United States and saying we could put a nuclear bomb in there and blow them apart, couldn't we? So there is the bedrock of concern that
Look, there is some hope here.
He can stab himself in the thigh and look as crazy as he likes. But
Well,
it only works if he doesn't actually go and stab the other side, his sporting friend, in the foot because he's a bad shot.
right. Well, I'll tell you, if Vladimir Putin stabbed himself in the thigh before throwing a knife, I'd take him seriously. Now,
Yeah, but they're
let
two
me
different
say
kettle of
this.
fish. Then.
It is well known that twice in U.S. history, the president has been separated from the bomb.
Yeah.
The first time was Richard Nixon, who in the middle of Watergate was drinking heavily.
Right.
Henry Kissinger decided that with the Joint Chiefs of Staff,
Yep.
that they would disconnect the so-called button.
Yeah. And Reagan, was it?
Yeah, the second time was Ronald Reagan, who had Alzheimer's disease.
Early stages, yep.
His staff knew it. The public did not know it. But after he made those unguarded contents about launching bombs in 5 minutes, which caused the Soviets to react in full defensive measure, they went to their highest nuclear posture. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, again with George Herbert Walker Bush, the vice president of the time, decided to separate Reagan from the button.
Right.
In this day and age, Trump has codes that he enters in order to authorize a strategic nuclear strike. I would argue, given his behavior, that the codes either spell out some sort of strange smorgasbord of words, or they result in the alarm bell ringing in the White House kitchen. I don't think that he has a direct line on nuclear launches precisely because he is so erratic. The Joint Staff cannot afford to have a person like that launch a preemptive war of a nuclear sort, because even under the best scenario, if a lot of the U.S. nukes are able to get through onto Russian and Chinese soil, because let's remember, if you're going to go after one, best go after both. Because what's going to be left standing for the third party is going to be easy pickings otherwise. And so the military knows this. And I would imagine, given that he didn't even look at the nuclear war scenarios when it was presented to him when he came into office, that they've separated him from the actual launch codes and given him something else, which I quite frankly am very grateful for. So irrationality works in a number of ways. What is
Look,
rational to the Iranian regime
yeah,
may appear irrational to us. Kim Jong-un may appear irrational to us, but in his insular world, his
yeah,
threat assessments, maybe launching a nuke at Japan
right,
would be rational. So
yeah,
that gets back to your original point, which is, have we entered a situation with new technologies and the like, more actors capable of acquiring them, of enhanced deterrence or decreased deterrence, or enhanced possibility of miscalculation or decrease? And I would say the chances of deterrence are decreasing and the chances of miscalculation are increasing.
On that note, Paul, let's wrap it up.
Always my pleasure, Selwyn.
Really, really excellent program. Thank you for that contribution. It's sobering, isn't it, to say the least.
That's why we're wearing black.
That's why we're in black, and we didn't organise that, did we? So it was just by chance. At this point, I'd just like to acknowledge a journalist and a mentor to many, Phil Wallington, who passed away on September 11th. And here in New Zealand, he's a journalist of note, a broadcaster of note, and he gave voice to so many who would have otherwise remained silent. So just respect to Phil. So thank you, people, for joining us for this program, and we'll be back this time next week, and take care.